Hare Krishna. Question: when Krishna disapproves renunciation, saying that we should not disturb the minds of others, and when of people who are ignorant or attached, and even when Arjuna says that Krishna, I may be qualified to renounce, I'm not ignorant or attached, still Krishna tells Arjuna to set an example. You should do your duty and not renounce. So then, when Krishna disapproves renunciation, why did Srila Prabhupada give sannyas to young people in America when they were very new to Krishna consciousness and when the movement was also in its early days? Answer: there is a eternal principle and there is a contextual application. So the eternal principle is that we are all meant to be devoted to Krishna, and how we devote ourselves to Krishna will vary according to time, place, circumstance. So if we look at before we come to ISKCON, we can just look at the varying contexts of the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, and therein itself we will see that the same principles of bhakti are taught in dramatically different ways because the contexts are different. The Bhagavad Gita is spoken when Arjuna has as a devotional duty the responsibility to be the frontline warrior in a war for establishing dharma. And when Arjuna gives up his devotee, his renunciation at that time is pratikul to his bhakti. It is pratikul, it is unfavorable to his service to Krishna. And that is why Krishna tells Arjuna that you should do your duty and fight. And he gives various levels of arguments, all of which have the consistent conclusion that Arjuna, you should fight. In contrast, we see in the Bhagavatam, it is spoken to a person who has been cursed to die, Parikshit Maharaj, and the central responsibility for him now is to not worry about whether his successor has been adequately trained, whether any other neighboring king is going to invade. He should not distract himself by anything. He should just focus his mind on Krishna wholeheartedly. And for that purpose, Shukdev Goswami selects stories and gives analysis that center on the message of renunciation. There is Jada Bharat at the young age, Bharat Maharaj at a young age renouncing. When there is a problem in administration, we have Maharaj Anga. When his son turns out to be bad, he just renounces the world. He doesn't think that let me have another queen and maybe get another son who will be a better son. Let me depose this son. He doesn't get involved in those things at all. The consistent mood of the Bhagavatam is that just focus on Krishna. Just renounce the world. Now, if we see in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we see at one level, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself renounced the world when he was very young, just at the age of 24. Now, we could even judge Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's actions from Krishna's words. And somebody might argue that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, why he has renounced prematurely? Now, Krishna doesn't approve premature renunciation. No, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to preach Krishna's message, and the sannyasa ashram gave him the necessary prestige and necessary freedom from other responsibilities so that he could travel and preach vigorously. And that is what he did. So for that time, that was anukul for his bhakti. Of course, he's God demonstrating the mood of bhakti and sharing the message of bhakti, and that was anukul, so he accepted that. But at the same time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not criticize any of his Grihastha disciples who continued to be Grihasthas. Practically the entire Mayapur community of devotees was Grihasthas. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had very intimate relationships where he was never judgmental with them for being Grihasthas. They were all absorbed in Krishna. So now we see herein that there are varying ways in which the principles of bhakti can be practiced according to time, place, circumstance. When Srila Prabhupada preached in America, at that time most of his disciples had already renounced their family connections. That was a part of the counterculture, and they had they had turned away from their families, they had turned away from their jobs, turned away from their careers, from their education, and some of them were searching for something spiritual. And those who, after some years of practice, showed themselves to be committed, showed themselves to be having aspirations to share Krishna's message far and wide, Prabhupada encouraged and channeled their aspiration by giving them sannyas. So the point is, at that point in the Krishna consciousness movement, where Srila Prabhupada knew that he was himself running out of time, he started his mission when he was almost 70 years old, and he knew that he was not going to live forever. So within the time he had, he wanted his mission to be Krishna's message to be shared as far and as vigorously as possible. And he observed that these young devotees who were inspired to share Krishna's message, by giving them sannyas, he was able to empower them further. Empower them further in what sense? We may say that in America, sannyasis don't get much prestige. No, they don't. But the Krishna consciousness movement itself was spreading rapidly, and the devotees who were sannyasis, just because of their ashram, they got a lot of assistance from other devotees, because they thought, oh, this is sannyasi, we should assist him. And then the preaching happened by that. So what Srila Prabhupada did was a emergency measure for sharing Krishna consciousness vigorously. And in many ways, what Srila Prabhupada did as a bold measure, it was successful. The kind of spreading of the movement that happened in 11 years during Srila Prabhupada's presence, we often give credit to Srila Prabhupada, and it is right that we give credit to him, that he built 108 temples, he wrote 70 books, he traveled around the world for 14 times, and he inspired millions of people to take to Krishna Bhakti. All this is true. At the same time, he did it with the assistance of his disciples. And it was his disciples who were distributing his books. It was his disciples who were attracting new people and inspiring them to take initiation from him. It was his disciples who were acquiring land and setting up the infrastructure and helping to make the temples manifest. So it was Srila Prabhupada was definitely the driving force, the inspiration. But without taking any credit away from him, we also need to give due credit to those who were inspired by him and those who dedicated themselves to him. That is Srila Prabhupada's disciples, especially his pioneering disciples. The way they sacrificed and the way they shared Krishna consciousness was extraordinary. So we see Srila Prabhupada's giving sannyas to young devotees in the formative stages of the Krishna consciousness movement as a Apat-dharma. Apat-dharma means an emergency religion. Srila Prabhupada, emergency duty we could say. Srila Prabhupada would often use the example of, if there's a house on fire, even if we don't know the language, we'll still somehow wake the person who was sleeping in the house and get them to safety. Srila Prabhupada had that mood in his preaching, and he did what was required. But at the same time, he did tell in his books about the standards, about how Varnashram involves, one should not take sannyas prematurely, and usually till the age of 50 one doesn't take sannyas. So that is the standard, and the Apat-dharma, so rejecting the need for Apat-dharma is also wrong, because we do not understand the mode of emergency, the circumstance in which the emergency has come. At the same time, making the Apat-dharma a standard is also wrong. Or saying that because the Apat-dharma was practiced at one time, there is no need for any standard dharma, that is also wrong. So now, as the Krishna consciousness movement is stabilizing, and as it is gaining more and more roots in various parts of the world through the temple communities, now the sannyas standards are much higher. They are much closer to the traditional standards, wherein devotees who are usually beyond the age of 50 and who have had an exemplary and long track record of dedicated and pure-hearted service, they, after a significant period of vigilance, only after that they are given sannyas. So we see Srila Prabhupada's giving sannyas to young disciples not as a contradiction of Krishna's teachings avoiding premature renunciation. Those are contextual specifically for Arjuna, and they also have universal application in terms of universal dharma. But the essential point is anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam. whatever is favorable for bhakti, we do that. And for Srila Prabhupada in his advanced age, pioneer and establish a movement all over the world, he needed dedicated missionaries, and giving sannyas helped him in spreading this mission rapidly and laying a foundation for its sustenance even after he departed. So it was a emergency Apat-dharma which he did, and it was something which was necessary and which was significantly successful in helping share Krishna's message far and wide. Thank you. Hare Krishna.